Hello. I hope you're not melting away. It's 10 in the morning here and it's 80 degrees already. Not cool. So, yes, I'm going to pump out this video before the air turns to fire. It's what my lungs already feel like. We Pacific Northwesterners are babies when it comes to weather. If it gets over 80 degrees, we're like, ah. I know you guys in Arizona and New Mexico and Texas, you just laugh at the shit like this. 80 degrees at 10 in the morning is probably a dream come true for you, but not here. That's why we live here and you live there. We live here because we like to breathe. We like to breathe oxygen that's not being ignited. Anyway, enough of that shit. I'm going to do something new today. I've been threatening to do this ever since I started this channel, and it's time. I want to do it. And I'll probably only get 4 people watching this video, but that's cool. I want to do this, and it's time. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite movies. It's not one of my favorite horror movies or comedies, which is what it is. It's both of those things. It's just one of my favorite movies, and that's what I'm going to chat about. I'm going to talk about this, Return of the Living Dead. And I'm going to talk about the soundtrack as well. I'm always going to fit music into the equation here to some degree. But this is one of my favorite movies. This came out at a time where I was very impressionable youth, 1985. This was written and directed by Dan O'Bannon, who is, you should know that name. If you're into sci-fi and horror, you probably already know his name. Not probably, you do. If you're into sci-fi and horror and you don't know that name, I'm deeply shocked right now. Dan O'Bannon wrote Dark Star. He did not direct Dark Star. This other little tiny director named John Carpenter directed that. But he is responsible for Dark Star. He also acted in Dark Star. A lot of those classic samples you hear in those Meat Beat Manifesto albums that I talk about, like Drop, Drop, that's Dan O'Bannon. He acted in that movie, and that is his voice, and that is him acting. This was his directorial debut. He wrote other tiny little sci-fi movies like Alien. Maybe you've heard of that. So Dan O'Bannon is a legend in the horror sci-fi universe, and this is his directorial debut. He only directed a couple movies. This was his first and best. He just timed it really well with this one. It was the mid 80s were still, they were starting to peel back and get more conservative. It was the Reagan years after all. They started doing a little, I shouldn't say that the movies were any less crazy or violent in terms of this type of genre. But, and I'll show a couple of other versions here. It wasn't any, movies weren't any less intense, but after the Heaven's Gate debacle in 1980, Michael Cimino's film, the whole industry shifted. In the 70s, they gave carte blanche to the directors. They let the directors do whatever they wanted to do. And they did that with Heaven's Gate. And Michael Cimino had just done The Deer Hunter, which in my humble opinion is one of the most overrated movies of all time. Maybe that's a totally different discussion. But that has never been my favorite movie. In fact, I find The Deer Hunter to be one of the most boring movies of all time. He then went on to do Heaven's Gate, which, if you want boring, look no further than Heaven's Gate. It flopped. It was a huge mess. And that was a shift in Hollywood. A shift that's never really been righted, in my opinion. That is a change in Hollywood that has never changed back. That was the last time directors would ever be given carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. I think that's why the 70s, in my opinion, is the greatest decade of all time for movies. Studios just let the directors do what they wanted to do. And because of that, you have all of the amazing movies we have from the 70s. It's just the greatest decade for movies. I will argue that point to anybody. And it's not even really close, I think. The 60s are what they are when it comes to movies. There's plenty of good stuff in the 60s. The 70s happened. It just went in a totally different direction. And then in 1980, after Heaven's Gate, just things started slowly going to this other side. And now, in modern times, all we have are superhero movies. I think I see maybe one or two new movies a year now. I can't even believe the the low quality of film that happens today, especially in the horror genre. I don't have a fucking clue what's going on with horror movies these days. People watch horror movies now and they're frightened and scared, and I look at them, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like Walt Disney levels of horror. The shit people think is frightening now, I think is laughable. None of it, there's no character arcs anymore. It's just all about bad CGI. It's all about the jump scares. It's all about blasting the music in your face at the last second to create some artificial jump scare. It's trash. There's nothing of any substance being made in the horror genre. I don't see it. And I know I'm probably just sounding like a bitter old man, but it is what it is. Horror movies suck now. They're just shit. I don't understand it. I think when you're young and you see horror movies, that's what you get used to. So I'm sure younger people who watch these newer horror movies, they're frightened by them because they haven't seen the stuff that came before it. And the stuff that came before it probably looks dated to them. So it's just this vicious cycle. I'm not going to claim that I know the answers to what's scary and what's not scary. I definitely watch horror movies now and I laugh. It's like, these are movies you would see on TV. These R-rated horror romps. I'm like, really? Rated R? Why is this rated R? What are we protecting children from? This is just garbage. Are we protecting them from bad CGI? Are we protecting them from absolutely zero character arcs? This is the reason why movies like Don't Look Now and The Exorcist and The Thing, these are my favorite horror movies. And yeah, they're old now, but that's what I grew up on. And those are character movies. They do have levels of special effects and blood and guts, but at their heart and their soul, they're character arcs. And that's what this is. And this is one of the most unique horror movies I've ever seen. I'm showing you a different version, by the way. I'll get back to my analysis and critique of horror movies and how it compares to this. But this is the pain of being a physical media collector. Am I right? Blu-ray, 4K, DVD fans? You love a movie and you see this and it's got a new cover. And of course the companies know this. They put it out with a new cover and you're like, yeah, I got to get this. I love that movie. And then like a couple years later, this comes out, another Blu-ray I have. Oh my God, it's got a slipcase. I have to have it. And it's got one new bonus feature and it's a collector's edition. This is the original artwork for the movie, by the way. The two punks at the grave, or three, I should say. I used to have this poster on my wall as a kid. Every morning I woke up and it was right at the foot of my bed. It was the first thing I saw every morning. And then this is the newest 4K release. Got that original artwork. And it looks awesome, by the way. But getting back to the critique, this is why I love Return of the Living Dead, is because really at its heart, it's a character arc. It's about a bunch of people who are fucked and find themselves in a situation they can't get out of. And what makes this really unique to me is that it's a comedy. That is not something that happened a lot back then. I would argue this is the greatest comedy / horror movie of all time, with the exception of American Werewolf in London. I think the American Werewolf in London is just one of the greatest movies ever made. John Landis, he destroyed it in that movie. A movie's never been funnier and more horrific all at once than American Werewolf in London. This is more of a romp. American Werewolf in London is truly intense, emotionally. He plays with some Nazi imagery in that movie, and Landis really just hits it home with the images he's trying to impart to the audience. This is more, I would argue this is more of a comedy. It definitely has more blood and guts, I think, than American Werewolf in London. Not that American Werewolf does not have its share of blood and guts. This is just more gory. Intestines being ripped out, and it really focuses on that glory time of special effects. You know, the George Romero style. Brains and guts and shit oozing out, and it was fun. They don't do that anymore. It's all CGI now. I've always thought that, you know, the new effects, it's funny, like I think CGI, it looks real and feels fake. This looks fake and feels real. This old school effect. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say there? Yeah, it looks fake, but when it's actually on screen and you're experiencing it, it feels like it's really happening. It doesn't matter how goofy it looks. You still feel way more into that scene than you would watching what you know is a computer generating effects. I do think that's part of the downfall just in general in humanity when it comes to movies and social media. It's everyone's disengaged now, and we're trained to be that way. Movies like this pull you back. You get to feel it. Even though you know it's completely nonsensical and completely unreal, and it's a total fantasy, you still feel more engaged with what's happening on screen. That's also because of the writing. Dan O'Bannon does a great job with his writing here. The actors really do an amazing job. And speaking of the actors, you get Gallagher, some classics. I mean, Dan O'Bannon knew how to cast this movie. Obviously, there was a casting person who did that, but he had final say. Gallagher's in this movie. James Karen, come on. James Karen, one of the greatest character actors of all time. And he provides the biggest laughs, I think. He's the funniest person in the whole movie. It's not a bad question, Bert. Lines like that. Obviously, it's written, but it takes timing to deliver lines like this. And James Karen crushes it. Awesome stuff. Here are the special features. My experience with this movie was in the area of the country that I live. I don't know if it was like this across the US, but I was what, 12, 13 when this movie came out? And it was rated R. Here in the US, you need to be 17 years old to get into a rated R movie. At the local theater that I went to see movies, they never checked my ID. I would get on the bus and take the bus to the mall every weekend and see a movie. And usually they're rated R, and they never stopped me from coming in. It's probably illegal, I don't know, but they never cared. I threw down my $4 or whatever it was to get into a movie, and I was in. And that's how I saw this movie. I definitely didn't tell my parents because they would have never let me see something like this, I think, at the theater, even though they let me watch shit like this at home. We had cable when I grew up. We had HBO and we had a VCR. VCRs in the early 80s were like $500 a piece to buy. That's in 1982 type money. That's a lot of money. But we had a VCR, and my parents let us rent whatever we wanted to watch, and they let us watch whatever we wanted to watch. And of course, it was all, for me at least, I was obsessed with horror movies. It was all about the heaviest, most intense shit I could possibly watch. And they would let me do that at home, but they didn't like me going to the theater to watch rated R movies. I'll have to ask my parents about why that is. I don't know why they were like that. But I saw this in the theater. And I was a kid, and I loved it. What really struck me about this movie, and I'd never seen anything quite like it, and I haven't quite seen anything since like it, is how funny this is. I think there's enough humor right here on the one sheet poster, right here. This is pretty funny. You watch the movie, though, it's pretty scary, too. And that's a hard thing to balance. And Dan O'Bannon did it. And this is a absolutely unabashed homage to George Romero, even to the point where they mention his name. in one of the very opening scenes, the scene where Freddie and James Karen are having that conversation. They're talking about Night of the Living Dead. They're talking about George Romero. This movie was supposed to be directed by Tobe Hooper as well. Tobe Hooper, who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another one of the most massively overrated horror movies in my opinion. I know I'm going to offend a lot of people with that. I have never thought Texas Chainsaw Massacre is all that. I'm sure back in 1974 it was the most frightening shit anybody had ever seen, but I have just never been able to get into that movie. I've tried many times. And Tobe Hooper, who directed Poltergeist, even though Steven Spielberg really directed that movie, but that's another video. But yeah, Tobe Hooper. He was supposed to direct this, and then he went on to direct Life Force. I don't know what the details are. I don't really care, but he was supposed to direct this initially. Life Force is an interesting movie. Tobe Hooper just, I don't know, he wasn't a great director, in my opinion. He had issues with his movies. Funhouse is pretty good. I'd argue Funhouse might be his best. That's his most fun. This would have been a different movie if Tobe Hooper had directed it. One thing his movies do not have, in my opinion, is a lot of humor. And Dan O'Bannon brought that. And that's what gives this movie the charm. Here's the inside of this. I'll show the actual, if I can get this back in here. You have 3 discs here. Let me know if this is too boring for you. I kind of hesitate to show discs, but you get the 4K, you get the Blu-ray, you get a ton of bonus features. It's absolutely worth it. You want to get this. But the balance of the humor and the horror is great. Like I just mentioned, that first scene with the cadaver, when the cadaver's running loose, he busts out of the meat locker and he's chasing them, and they saw his head off and he's still moving and his mouth is twitching, and they put the axe in his brain. They finally kill this thing by putting the axe in its brain. That's a really funny scene, but it's truly horrific. You see the looks on their faces, and then watching them slowly turn into the zombies is really, you can feel their pain. It's really agonizing watching Freddy, and I can't remember James Cameron's character's name, but watching them turn into zombies is really captivating stuff. And watching the movie shift between the comedy angles and the horror angles is really fascinating to watch. I don't know that another movie has ever balanced that so well. Another thing that I really enjoy about this movie, especially when I was a kid, was punk rockers were still kind of threatening back then. The mohawks and the shit in the face and the piercings, like that was still pretty dangerous back then. People were kind of scared of that. This movie humanized them. They were people in this movie. They weren't immune from getting eaten. The zombies had no discretion about who they chomped. And so I remember as a kid watching this thinking, oh yeah, punks aren't so badass after all. They're not some kind of weird aggro superheroes. They too get eaten. Zombies will sink their teeth into their flesh just like they will ours. And seeing them run for their lives and be scared was something new for me. Punks were just kind of like a thing. They weren't even human back then to me. This is the movie that humanized them for me. So, yeah, I think Dan O'Bannon does a phenomenal job of that. He humanizes all of these characters. They all become one. They're all different ages, different backgrounds, different lifestyles, but then when the zombies start chasing you, you're all the same. You're running for your fucking lives. And that is what this movie pulls off really well. I love the military angle too, the old man in the house with his wife. You're trying to figure out what that is, and at first, the wife is like, the military guy is like, well, until we find them, we don't know what to do. And she's like, well, when will you find them? Christ, Ethel, I don't know. We've been over this. Like, what exactly are they talking about here? So there's some mystique there. You're trying to figure that out. Of course, we all know what happens at the end when that whole area gets nuked. And we realize that all humans are expendable. You think your life is important, but it's not. You're just like every other cockroach scurrying around on the planet. The military or the powers that be think you're expendable, they'll push that button in a heartbeat. So the apocalyptic ending is super cool too. That's something that carries a lot of weight. I think a lot of horror movies now, they try to have that corny, cheesy, pat ending. Not here. This movie, it's like everyone's wiped out. Nobody lives. Nobody. And even after they think they've secured the area, at the very end, the zombie pops out of the ground anyway. So you don't get a happy ending here. As goofy and funny and amusing as the movie is, it's a total apocalypse. Love this movie. I can't watch this movie enough. There's so many scenes and so many motifs and motivations in this movie. But I think at the end of the day, for me, this movie is about people coming together in times of strife and intensity. That's why this movie will always hold weight, because like what's going on in Hawaii right now, everything's burning down. Everyone, you forget all of your class structures in those moments. You all come together and you try to survive. And that's why this movie will always have import for people, I think. These movies are timeless. The whole punk thing and the music, which I'll get to, that can be dated because it came out in the 80s, but the basic human function is there. Everyone's trying to survive. You forget, we toil away on the surface and worry about these little mundane, trivial things, and they carry a lot of weight in our everyday lives, and we worry about them. But at the end of the day, we're all going to the same place, ultimately. And at the end of our lives, perhaps we look back at all the things we used to worry about and we realize how stupid that was. And we only learn this more intensely as we get older. And that's why this movie has a lot of emotional weight for me. As a kid, when you're watching this, you just see the zombie on the table, brains, brains, brains. You're really moved by that. But as you get older, you start to see there's more weight here, emotionally. That's another thing, too, in terms of the talking zombie. That never happened. I remember being fascinated with that when I was a kid because I had seen the Romero zombie movies. There weren't really a lot of zombie movies then. Dawn of the Dead is very funny too. I'm talking about the Romero original now. Don't get crazy and start talking about that shitty remake that came out in 2004 or whenever that came out. It was horrible. I'm talking about Romero here. Dawn of the Dead, when they're in the mall. That's a pretty damn funny movie, too. Frightening. That movie changed my life. That's one of my all-time favorites. And in my opinion, Dawn of the Dead is the greatest zombie movie ever made. This is number 2. And I think a lot of the reason for that is humor. You've got to look at this in a funny light. The zombie movies that are supposed to be horrific and scary, that shit doesn't move me. You've got to have humor. Like The Walking Dead, the series, I can't watch that. It's just too far up its own ass. It's too busy being serious. You've got to have some humor. Humans are funny. They're not always walking around with stern looks on their faces. Humans are always cracking jokes. It's how we get through the day. Our lives are filled with stupidity and obnoxious humor, and that's what this is. I can't watch zombie movies that take themselves too seriously. It depends. I mean, sometimes they work. I think most times they don't. I think Romero's Land of the Dead was good. That was an interesting progression. I think Day of the Dead is good. Those movies weren't very funny, though. Day of the Dead especially was fucking intense, man. I remember after watching Dawn of the Dead and how funny that was, and then watching Day of the Dead, it was like, whoa. There's nothing funny about that movie. That's just pure intensity. People hating each other and stabbing each other in the back. But that was Romero's vision. I mean, and it's true. In those kinds of chaotic situations where you're running for your lives, who knows how we'd act? That's the human condition. We all think we'd act in a certain way, but when it comes down to it and we're put in that situation or we're forced into a corner, we know how we react when we're forced into a corner. We might like to pretend that we know what we do in that situation, but we don't. And we can look at life that way from anything, from wars, World War II, being put into a situation we don't want to be in. None of us know what we'd do. We romanticize what we think we'd do, but that's not necessarily what we'd do. And this movie's good when it comes to that. These people are in fight or flight mode, man. This is a fucking phenomenal movie. Highly recommend it. And those of you watching this are probably, you're all nodding. You know why this movie's great. It's hilarious. And it's all pulled together by one thing that makes it incredibly unique. And it was a brilliant idea by Dan O'Bannon. And it's all pulled together by this, the soundtrack. There's great music on here. The crux of the cast are all punks. You have Gallagher and James Karen. You have the older guys at the morgue, but then you have the punks, and this is their soundtrack to life. And I bought this when I saw the movie. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. There's the track listing. And you get some classics. They're mostly California groups. Take a look at that. TSOL. You get the Damned, Tall Boys. For me, it was about this. The Cramps. Surfing Dead. This is where I learned of the Cramps. I didn't know a damn thing about them in 1985. I heard Surfing Dead, and I have been a fan ever since. The Cramps. Do rock bands get much better than the Cramps? I don't think so. Surfing Dead. They have found a lot of newfound popularity because of Tim Burton. He threw Goo Goo Muck into that Wednesday show. That's cool. I always thought Goo Goo Muck was one of their least interesting songs, personally. It's fine. It's the Cramps, but their best? Nah. But if he's bringing a new audience to the Cramps, that's a good thing. But Goo Goo Muck, yeah, that's far from their best, in my opinion. Surfing Dead, that's one of their best, I think. What a track. My personal favorite Cramps album, by the way, is Stay Sick. I'll do a video on that at some point. Stay Sick. What a brilliant album. They never did one better, in my opinion. The two essential Cramps records you want, really, are Stay Sick and Bad Music for Bad People. I know that's a compilation, but you get all the hits, man. All the essentials right there on one record. Bam, and it's done. She Said is on there. That's a Hazel Atkins song. That's not Cramps, but the Cramps turned it into something that was all their own. But that's what kind of happens with this soundtrack in a lot of ways. These bands kind of make the atmosphere their own. As they're running for their lives, running from the zombies, you hear this music blasting. And that was another new thing. You didn't hear hokey, you weren't being cued by hokey, stupid music like you do in horror movies now. That's just a cop-out, I think a lot of horror movies have now. They know that they can't scare the audience with their story or their characters, so they blast this shitty music in your face. Music should be in the background. It should be accompanying what's going on with the characters. It shouldn't be superseding what the characters are doing. And that's what horror movies do now. It's just part of the whole makeup of horror movies. I'm sure they have it written into the script. Like something happens and then in the script it says blare loud music. That's not scary. That's just making your ears bleed with annoying background music. That's not scary. That's annoying. This is scary because the situation is already scary. The music just puts more meat on the bone here. The music is the soundtrack to their lives. It's not the other way around. It shouldn't be the music overpowering what the humans are doing. The music's in the background. It is supposed to enhance the experience, not overtake the experience, not completely hold our hand through the experience. These guys are scared and they're running for their lives, and then the music plays. It shouldn't be music plays and then people jump and then you watch the people do what they do. The music is absolutely complementary to what these guys are doing, and I love it. This is a fantastic soundtrack. As always, I will show the labels. Nothing too exciting. It's in this plastic, the poly inner sleeve, which is key. This record is like brand new. I've had this since it was new, all right? And it plays like a damn new record because of that poly. Oh yeah, I forgot. Because of the poly sleeve. It also has, I still have my old insert. I forgot about this. This is a mail order insert. Check this out. How cool is this? You got to order shit from the label. This came out on Enigma. Enigma. Little catalog for other stuff on the label, but here's some. I'm actually really surprised I didn't. Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't fill this out. T-shirts. Return of the Living Dead, More Brains T-shirts. Send More Cops T-shirt. I know you're here because I can smell your brains T-shirt. And you need a medical supply T-shirt. Look at that. See if I can. Would you have sent away for all this stuff? I am shocked that I didn't. You need a medical supply. That's a shirt I want. I might have to go to Redbubble after this video and look that up. I would totally wear a You Need a Medical Supply T-shirt. That would be awesome. It's got the old hype sticker on it too. Oh, the memories. Such sweet, sweet memories, people. Hope you can see that. I mean, that's part of the fun of these types of releases, I think. All leading back to the movie itself, which is just one of my favorites. I could really deep dive into this movie, but this is my first movie review, and I don't really know how I want to carry this into the future. But I know some people on YouTube really dive deep into these movies, and that's fun and that's cool. But I want to talk about the overarching themes that happen with these movies. I want to talk about the physical media to some extent, and I want to talk about the soundtracks because that's a huge part of what made this movie so good. If this movie just had generic symphonic horror shit going on in the background, it wouldn't have worked. You had to have this legit, real music that these guys would listen to. Otherwise, it's just another generic horror movie. These are the little details that make this movie great. Dan O'Bannon thought about all those things, and that's what made him a great writer. And that's what newer movies are lacking, I think. Some of these newer horror movies, I can't even believe people think they're scary. What's the guy's name now? Ari Aster? Is that his name? He did that Midsommar movie. Are you serious? I watched Midsommar and I laughed at the end of that. Like, this is supposed to be scary? Who's fucking scared by this? It's like some G-rated jerk-off. But that's what people are watching. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I guess I'm not supposed to. That's where we're at when it comes to horror movies nowadays. Midsommar. Have you guys seen that? Please. Get the fuck out of here with that baby crap. Who in the hell is scared by that? Really? Midsommar? You want to feel some real fright and laugh at the same time? Watch this. Return of the Living Dead. One of the greats. All right, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.